Okay, class, our final exam will be coming up at the end of this week. The test will be comprised of 20% written, 30% oral, and 50% anal. Any questions?
From the burning mesas of the Sonoran Desert to the slot machine-clad boardwalks of New Jersey, it's the Imaginarium with Scott and Todd. I'm Scott Colbert.
And I'm the horror nerd, Todd Staruch.
And this week, get out your wide collared shirts and your corduroy pants because we're going back to the 70s.
I didn't know I had to wear pants.
And we're talking about the 70s because there was an idea that I've actually had for a while now. There's a TV channel called Antenna TV, and I have been watching it almost nonstop since I found out about it a couple of months ago. And what they do is they broadcast all the old sitcoms. I think the earliest sitcom that they play is Burns and Allen and the Jack Benny Show. And it goes all the way up to, I think the most recent one would probably be Family Ties. But it has everything in between. All in the Family, Barney Miller, Maude, Hazel, My Mother the Car.
My Mother the Car.
Yes. The show that singularly killed Jerry Van Dyke's.
Please. We have a similar cable channel here in New Jersey called Me TV, and it's the same exact idea. It's just all old shows, a lot of old game shows going all the way back to like Beat the Clock, where the top prize, was like a toaster. And people went bananas, today they give away, a car or $1 million, I think that the top prize was, $50 or something like that.
And I had never seen My Mother the Car. Now, granted, that's not 70s, that's early 60s.
Yeah.
But I had always heard about it. And then when I saw it one afternoon, I thought, holy shit, that really is a bad show. For those who don't know about this show, the basic premise is pretty much what the title is. This guy who's played by Jerry Van Dyke, his mother dies, and she's reincarnated as a car, a 1929 something or other. And only he can hear her, and so hijinks and shenanigans ensue from this rather interesting plot point.
What's interesting is there's a little bit of trivia. Do you know who did the voice of the mother?
Miss Ann Southern.
Ann Southern, that's right. A very famous stage, radio, film actress. I mean, she was a big time star.
They make it very prominent, and it's not just Ann Southern; it's Miss.
Yes, Miss Ann Southern.
I'm not sure what she was thinking when she did that show. She must have been, drinking a little bit back then.
Maybe, or you know what? Like, it's really no different, I guess, than today. Like, there are actors today, like big time actors that will do, just voiceover work for a paycheck. Yeah. I mean, money's money.
Well, and that's very true. And actors back then really weren't making the kind of money that they make now.
Oh God, no!
I mean, even if you adjust it for an inflation, they were still not making a whole lot. Because at that point, they still really had kind of the studio system where, they would just work for one studio and just churn out movie after movie, or in this case, TV show after TV show. Because if you look at these shows from the early 60s through the late 60s, you pretty much see the same people in these shows over and over again. Gail Gordon was probably in every fucking show that
Yep.
There was not a show that I've seen on Antenna TV where he's not had a part in it somewhere. Since I've been watching this, Antenna TV, I've been watching All in the Family.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember watching that back when it was aired originally. But that was 40 years ago, and I haven't really, well, not really, I haven't seen them since then. And a lot of the humor actually really went over my head as a kid. And the topics that they talked about, I mean, in just like a period of 2 weeks, Mike was impotent, Edith went through menopause, Edith was nearly raped on her 50th birthday, Edith had phlebitis, Gloria was nearly raped. There was a drag queen friend of Gloria and Mike's who was killed simply for being a drag queen. Those are pretty heady topics for early 70s.
Well, I'm glad you led off with All in the Family, because if you hadn't, I was going to. Now, I was just a kid, too, when it was on, so most of my experience with it is in reruns, except for the later seasons. And, back then, I didn't really know. I had no idea what racism really was, or, you mentioned a drag queen. I had no idea what that meant or anything. And later on, when I, watched it in reruns is when, to your point, I realized how groundbreaking that show really was, and how it was played perfectly. I saw an interview once with Norman Lear, and he talked about his concept for the show. And I think, if I remember correctly, one of his lines was, I wasn't going to do another show where I'm playing around with, mom dented the car, and how do we stop dad from finding out about it? He wanted to tackle like actual thought-provoking things, but do it in a humorous way. Let's make Archie's a total bigot, but he's such a buffoon that we're going to poke fun at racism because we're laughing at Archie Bunker and not with him,
He was racist, homophobic. One of my favorite lines of his, a friend of American Glory's was coming over, and the topic got around to this guy wearing glasses. Archie called him a queer, and Mike says, he's not a queer because he wears glasses. And Archie says, I never said he was a queer because he wears glasses. A guy who wears glasses is a four eyes. A guy who's a fag is a queer. That makes me laugh every time just because of Carol O'Connor's delivery. That is not a line that you could utter today.
Oh, Scott, you couldn't even, if you brought a show like All in the Family to the network today and pitched it, they would laugh you out of their office. Maybe a cable, channel might entertain it. You could never get away with it today. You and I have talked many times about how people simply don't get satire anymore. People would be up in arms about All in the Family.
You're absolutely right about that. I think what's funny is today the type of a character Archie Bunker is would be the poster boy for the Tea Party today.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. That's a great point. I grew up in an Italian culture. I grew up around that sort of casual racism of that time, the 70s. I heard the N-word I don't say every day, but I heard it enough, and other references to black people, in Italian it was moulignans, which means eggplant. And I heard that all the time, yet I never saw anyone in my family actually, no one ever actually harmed anybody or anything like that. But it was so casual, that's just how they talked, like it was nothing. Today, people would lose their minds.
you and I grew up around the same time, and the same area basically. I was on Long Island, you were in Jersey. There really isn't a whole lot of difference in attitude. And I had relatives who lived in Jersey. Both of my uncles lived in Jersey. My grandmother lived in Jersey for a short while. So we were out there all the time. It was just a part of the culture. And that's just how people talk. My parents' generation, I should say, that's just how they talked. And, I never really saw anything wrong with it because, when you grow up around it, obviously you don't really think anything of it. And it wasn't until, I actually really started going out on my own, actually in high school and after that I kind of realized, wow, my family was kind of racist. but it wasn't just limited really to minorities, because my parents slagged off, well, my family, I shouldn't say just my parents, Italians, the Irish, Germans, Japanese, I mean, you name it, there was nobody who was sacred.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have always believed, and I still believe today, that no matter what people will tell you, everybody, you, me, everyone else is a little bit racist. It's all a matter of degree. I have friends of every possible color, race, sexual orientation, nationality, and I don't care about any of that. And then every once in a while, I'll think something like really horrible in the back of my head, like somebody will cut me off driving and I'll think like the most vile thing in my head. And then I'll be like, wow, that was awful that I just thought that. People have inherent bias against those that are not like them. It's an ancient tribal mentality. It's 100,000 years of evolution. It's just what do you do with it? Like if you could sit in your house all day and say, God, I hate Puerto Ricans. I fucking hate them. And as long as that's as far as it goes, okay, so you hate them. You just don't go out and act on that,
Funny little story. My grandmother, on my mother's side, she was born in Ireland, and she came over with her sisters. Both of her parents had died when she was young, so they came over to America. And when my uncle was getting married, he was marrying an Italian. And my grandmother wouldn't speak to him for 3 years because he was marrying a Guinea.
Yeah, I totally believe it.
Yeah, and of course that was back in the late 40s. So there was really a totally different type of racism then. But now I hear that story and I tell that story and people are just like, what? Really? But that's how it was.
Absolutely. My mother's brother, when my grandmother was still alive and his first wife passed away. Now, I had just mentioned, right, I grew up Italian, specifically Sicilian. I had the exact opposite. We were Italians, and my uncle started dating an Irish girl, and that did not go over well with my Sicilian grandmother. So these things persisted for a long time. And, I wonder, like, I look at my daughter who's 11, and I wonder if, when she's my age, is she going to look back and think, how silly was it that in 2016 we were still arguing about gay marriage, or marriage equality? Like, the same way we think today about how silly that, you couldn't have interracial marriage, a few decades ago. So I wonder about that because the wheels do turn slowly.
I think what's interesting, these were shows that, I grew up with. I was, 8, 10, 12. So I wasn't even really cognizant of my own sexuality. But looking back and seeing these shows now at 50, and you see that they really were starting to have gays and talk about gays in these shows. Maybe not always in a positive light, but it was, the beginnings and the seeds were there. Certainly with All in the Family and the drag queen.
Yeah.
On Barney Miller, you had Marty and Mr. Driscoll. There's a gay character on Maude. And, of course, these were all Norman Lear shows, well aside from Barney Miller.
Sure.
All those Norman Lear shows really pushed the boundaries and really made what were considered, maybe minorities or unpleasant people, whether it was gays or blacks or Puerto Ricans, in a different light, in a positive light, for the most part. And it's really just kind of interesting. It's a time capsule. It really is a time capsule of an era of our history that I just find absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. You mentioned Maude, and so many great spinoffs from All in the Family, Maude, Good Times, The Jeffersons, but Maude had its own share of controversy. Maude, I clearly remember, and I didn't see it live, but I saw it as a rerun in the late 70s. Maude, there was the episode Maude had an abortion. For that to have aired on TV in, I guess it probably had to be 1971 or 1972. That episode, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, actually aired shortly before the Roe v. Wade decision. So again, Norman Lear right on top of important social issues of the time.
And he had spent years trying to get All in the Family on the air before it actually did make it on the air. There are, I think, 3 or 4 different versions of it prior to it finally getting the final cast and the final setting for it. But he had nothing but problems getting it on because the studio execs thought, well, nobody would want to see this. Who'd be interested in that? And it was, it was a runaway hit.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and if you think about it, think of some of the other popular shows of the 70s were kind of happy, Happy Days, is all about, nostalgia and fun, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now we want to have the Archie Bunk, All in the Family. It's like, what? Wait, what?
Yeah. And, and that carried on with the other shows. Although the Jeffersons was always a little bit more lighthearted. It tackled some social issues, but not nearly to the depth that All in the Family did. And Good Times did the same, but again, I think All in the Family was really the genesis of having that, what they would call a dramedy, because there was a far more dramatic moments in All in the Family than I ever remembered.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, we could go on, we could spend hours talking about just All in the Family. You mentioned I can picture it right now. The Edith, the Edith attempted rape episode and how she got out of it. And I remember the episode when Gloria, finally moved out, and it was the first time we saw Archie Bunker get choked up, and wipe away a tear, So yeah, it was as much as it was a comedy, it was a very heavy show.
My other favorite show from that time, and I'll go on to something else, but I have to talk about this because it was Barney Miller.
Yeah.
I mentioned that earlier. And my father was a policeman in New York, as I've mentioned many times on the shows. And even though he wasn't a detective, he knew the detectives, and of course, being on the force, he had always said that Barney Miller was the most realistic cop show that he'd ever seen.
Huh.
Which I guess kind of shows you what the police force was like back in the 70s.
Yeah, I guess.
There was another show that, like I said, Marty and Mr. Driscoll, and then Wojciechowicz being impotent in one show, and Fish and his hemorrhoids.
Oh, please. Abe. I just saw him, Scott, back in October at the Chiller Theater Convention here in New Jersey. He was doing photo ops, and he was, look, the man was 94 years old, so he had someone helping him get around, and I said hello to him and shook his hand. I mean, he was an old man, but he seemed to be in pretty good shape for someone in their mid-90s, but still he was very friendly, smiling. He seemed to really like interacting with the fans. And then I heard an interview with his wife on the radio, and she talked about how much he loved doing fan conventions because he really loved the fans.
See, that's interesting. I had no idea that he was doing conventions, because he would be somebody that I would actually pay a bit of money just to do a photo op with.
Yeah, I thought about it, and I forget how much it was. It wasn't a ton of money, but these conventions get expensive, so I took a pass, and now I regret it. He was only doing photo ops, no autograph, because he just couldn't handle it. So 2 or 3 times a day, he'd go for a half hour, to do these photo ops. But that's it, man. I don't want to, spiral, but he was one of those guys, he was in so many classic things. I was thinking about The Godfather the other day. Yeah. Can you get me off the hook for old time's sake? Sorry.
Well, and speaking of The Godfather, one of the things that Jerry Jand and I talk about on our show, the Weekday Matinee, and it's not something we actually ever consciously did or talked about on purpose, but a lot of the movies that we have talked about that are our favorites ended up being from the 70s. When I look back, a lot of the, some of the greatest directors that we have, came out of the 70s, and some of the greatest movies that we've had have come out of the 70s. And I don't know, it's one of those things, am I actually looking at it with a sense of romantic nostalgia, or were the movies really that good? And watching some of them over again, no, the movies really were that good, because they had to rely a lot more on story and acting, and less on special effects and let's fix it in post type stuff.
Yeah, let's fix it in post. No, I do agree with you. No, we have to. No, I think about that a lot, that what a fertile ground the 70s was for creativity, whether it was, music, a lot of great rock music from the 70s, TV, movies. Is there an element maybe of nostalgia? Sure. I mean, how can you not, I think about a show like the $6 Million Man. I literally grew up with that. That was one of my favorite shows as a kid, or MASH. Watching MASH was a ritual, because my father was, he was in the Army during Vietnam, not during Korea, but it still resonated with him, because it was somewhat familiar. So that was a ritual. We would watch MASH together as one of those shows, and I still remember many of the episodes, and I'll never forget that finale, which is still the highest rated network TV episode of all time.
That is definitely one of my favorite shows as well. That was one of the few shows that was consistent from the very beginning to the very end.
I agree.
Shows, when you've run 10 seasons, they kind of sputter and run out of gas, but MASH was one of the few that didn't, and it ended as strong as it started. Even All in the Family sputtered at the end when Gene Stapleton left and they went into Archie Bunker's place.
Yeah.
Actually, it kind of started going down where Mike and Gloria moved out to California, and then they ended up with a little girl.
Right.
That they had to care for. It kind of went down from there. MASH is, really very unique in that aspect, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just consistent quality. I mean, you had some heavy hitters as far as the actors, you know. Um, yeah, just consistently good right up until the end. You're right. 10 seasons is a long time. And they usually jump the shark after a while. So what were some of your other favorite shows from that era?
One show that I absolutely loved, and this is really probably just very regional, but it was Sunday mornings. It was Wonderama with McAllister.
Oh God, yes. God, yes. I saw when I was a kid. They took one. It was Wonderama Live. Went on tour. I saw Bob McAllister in person.
Because a friend and I had written for tickets, but there was a 2-year waiting list to get them. And by the time we actually would have gotten the tickets, it had ended up going off the air and becoming Kids Are People Too with a different host.
Yeah.
But Bob McAllister came to the high school that my sister went to, and so I got to see him there and shake his hand when he was going through the audience. But I loved that show. There's a few clips of it on YouTube, and it's kind of your typical cheesy morning kids show type thing. But goddamn, Sunday mornings just were not the same without that show.
Yeah. Wow. Or you know what? I think about the shows that my daughter watched growing up, and some of them are good, but our childhood, Scott, was the shit. I mean, we had the coolest shows. I know we were going to stick with the 70s, but just stuff like HR Puffin stuff and, all the Sid and Marty Krofft stuff and the Great Space Coaster. And man, we had an awesome childhood. Space Nuts. Yeah. Oh man.
with the Australian guy and the emu puppet. I always.
Oh yeah, good stuff.
It's a shame because it was such a part of growing up for me. Getting the Captain Crunch, and sitting in front of the TV for a few hours every Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Saturday morning, excuse me. And that's something that people today or kids growing up today are never going to be able to experience. And when you try and explain it to them, they just kind of give you this, look like, the RCA Victor Dodd.
Exactly.
I was talking with somebody on Facebook. They're in their early to mid 20s, and we were talking about writing and stuff. And then I just started, talking about some older shows, and because we were talking, nostalgia and whatnot. And I mentioned Jack Benny and George Burns, and they said, "Who?" And I thought, oh, God. I've finally gotten to the age where I mention somebody and somebody else doesn't know who the fuck they are.
It's funny. I wonder, this is a generational thing. Like, you and I and other people our age, we sit and we look back fondly on these shows and stuff that we watched when we were younger and we were kids. And I wonder if 30 years from now, is my daughter going to look back on the stuff she watches today the same way? I just find that fascinating to think about. Like, does it go in cycles? We talk about a lot, like, not to get too far off track, but people like, oh, today's music sucks. Well, my father thought the shit that I listened to when I was a kid sucked because it wasn't what he listened to, when he was a kid in the 50s. So it's all the same, like for 20 years from now, people will still be saying today's music sucks.
I saw something come across my Facebook feed today that it was either today or yesterday. It was the 40th anniversary release for Genesis's album, A Trick of the Tail.
Mm.
And I had to sit back and I thought, 40 years. Holy shit.
Right.
But 40 years later, people are still talking about that album. And I don't know that 40 years from now, people are going to be talking about Justin Bieber or Britney Spears, other than maybe in a Trivial Pursuit game.
I think about that a lot, and I have that discussion a lot with people. But if you if you really give it thought, there are a lot of albums, TV shows, movies that when they came out back then were not popular or critical successes. Before I got home today, I was talking to somebody about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. That movie bombed when it came out. Today, everybody loves Willy Wonka and, and the Chocolate Factory. I wonder if it's just things need a significant amount of time to really seep in. There's good music today, Scott. People just need to go and look for it. Maybe there is an album being written right now that we will be talking about 30 or 40 years from now. I don't know. Sometimes I think we're a little too dismissive. Now, I don't think, Justin Bieber, anybody's going to give a shit, 2 years from now. I get your point, but sometimes I think maybe we judge a little harshly.
You raise a good point, and that's really interesting. I really do actually think a lot of it is generational. Because I look back at, when we talked about music a couple of weeks ago, I had mentioned that, my mother's musical taste stopped at 1959. And, while that's humorous, when I look at what I listen to, my musical taste stops at probably about 1992 or 93. Probably right after Kurt Cobain died is when I kind of lost interest in newer music. And it had nothing to do with him dying. It just, what was coming out at the time wasn't all that appealing to me.
Yeah, I totally get it. And then this, so we can get back on our original topic. But when I was having this discussion, an online discussion about today's music, no one is telling you need to listen to top 40 radio, people post Facebook memes all the time. And, I saw one the other day, like they put lyrics from Stairway to Heaven next to lyrics from Nicki Minaj to illustrate how shitty. And I'm like, well, who's telling you to listen to Nicki Minaj? Go listen to some good bands, or some good artists of today that are writing good songs. Like, yeah, if you go looking at Nicki Minaj for lyrical depth, you're going to be disappointed. It's not really fair, I think, to make a comparison like that, or to compare Freddie Mercury with Justin Bieber. That's just silly, and a little bit elitist, if you ask me.
It is, because there were certainly plenty of songs from back then that were really probably as nonsensical and bad as Nicki Minaj's stuff.
Chuck Berry wrote and recorded a song called My Ding-a-Ling, okay? And it's about exactly what you think it is.
And I can't remember the name of the group now, but it was called Heartbeat, and then parentheses, it's Love Beat. Heartbeat, it's a love beat.
Yeah.
It's a good vibe. I growing up, I actually kind of liked that song, but I listened to it on YouTube a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, holy shit, how insipid. What the hell was that thinking? But, it came out when I was like 10, so, it was pop music for the times.
Yeah, what was the name of the band? It was like a family name of some kind. It'll come to me. 2 minutes from now, I'm going to blurt it out. DeFranco Family. Was that it? I'm going to Google it right now. I'm Googling it. DeFranco Family. Had a number of hits between 1973 and 1977, including Abracadabra and their biggest hit, Heartbeat, It's a Love Beat.
Yeah.
There were a lot of novelty songs. Disco Duck hit number 1.
Oh, yeah. And that just goes along with what you always say about memes and really kind of how pointless they are.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just drop it because I'll go off on one of my tears and I'll just save that for my Facebook page. Get back to TV. So I was thinking about this the other day because my daughter and I were watching Wonder Woman reruns on MeTV. And I remember watching it as a kid and not understanding then why my dad was so interested in watching Wonder Woman with me, because to me, it was just a goofy superhero show. Then puberty kicked in and I realized why Dad liked watching Wonder Woman so much. Now it's, I didn't never realized when I was little what a great jiggle show it was. Mm-hmm. That and Charlie's Angels, two great jiggle shows.
Oh, yeah. I love Wonder Woman. What was the other? Greatest American Hero.
Yeah. William Catt does a ton of conventions. He's a really nice guy.
Going on to something just a little bit different, but still with TV, is news. Now, you're from the tri-state area, so I'm sure you remember Roger Grimsby and Bill Butel.
Bill Butel, absolutely.
When I think about news, that's kind of what I base my views on what a news show should be like. They reported it, there's none of this really filler stuff that led off on the news. And they were really professional, really good. And you actually kind of felt like they were family after a while. Of course, there was Tex Antoine, the weatherman.
Yeah, well, that was part of our evening ritual. We watched the Eyewitness News with we watched Eyewitness News with Roger Grimsby and Bill Butel, and back then you felt like you could actually trust what they were telling you, and it was definitely journalism as opposed to let's be the first ones to break the story regardless of how accurate it is.
I remember when they were doing the Son of Sam stuff.
Yeah.
They had some of the best reporting on that I saw, what I remember from any of the shows. Do you remember why Tex Antoine got fired from Channel 7?
No, I really don't.
Tex Antoine was a drinker, and he used to have a few before he went on the air. And this one particular night, his last night on the air, for a while anyway, there was a lead story about an 8-year-old girl who had been raped. And Tex Antoine, for whatever reason, wasn't paying attention a whole lot to the news story. And when he started off his weather report that night, he said, if rape is inevitable, just lay down and enjoy it.
Wow.
Yeah. I remember that night. I remember him saying that because my father and mother just looked at each other like, what did he just... Did I hear... What? And, oh, holy mackerel, what a firestorm that created back then.
Yeah, wow.
But amazingly enough, several years later, he got back on the air doing weather. So, I don't know whether he sobered up or what, but could you imagine that today?
No, I can't. I really can't. That person would be just drawn and quartered. Like, that would be it. I mean, the difference being he's a weatherman, I do have, again, not to switch topics too much, but I do have a really big problem when radio or TV stations hire people who are known for controversial humor and then fire them for doing exactly what they got hired for. I grew up listening to Don Imus, I mean, my dad was a huge Don Imus fan. You hire a guy that is going to say crazy shit, and then you fire him when he says crazy shit. Now Tex Antoine's kind of, different. He's not expected to say things like that. I know what you mean.
I was a huge Imus in the Morning fan. I absolutely loved his show. The characters that he did, Reverend Billy Saul Hargis.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, I actually had a signed copy of his book, God's Other Son, that he had written as Billy Saul Hargis. It was one of the funniest books I'd ever read in my life.
Yeah, I mean, later on, I think, like, in recent years, he lost some of his edge, and it seemed like he was just trying too hard. It was like radio and comedy seem to have passed him by. Yeah. But I did think I was totally against it when he got fired. Again, you hire a guy and you pay him to make controversial remarks, and then the minute somebody gets their feathers ruffled, you make them a scapegoat. I hate that.
It's really a shame because a lot of good careers end up going down the toilet because of that. Now, I was never, what was it, Opie and Andy?
Opie and Anthony.
I was never a big fan of theirs, but, when Anthony went through his whole big thing, I thought he really got kind of an unfair shake.
Yeah, I agree. And again, you know what? We could draw all this back to when we were talking about, All in the Family and Maude and controversial topics. Episodes of TV can get yanked from the air today because enough people bitch about it, And I'm sure, I know that when doing research much later, when the abortion episode aired on Maude, they got thousands of protest letters from various groups. They just didn't give a shit back then, They're like, okay, great, you were offended, okay.
Well, yeah, well, Maude was really the first real quote unquote feminist on TV.
Yeah.
I mean, she was a loud and proud feminist, liberal, big mouth, and people weren't used to such. And I think that's what it was. People weren't used to such a strong female character.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm sure you're right about that.
And I think one of the reasons, outside of the racism and stuff that All in the Family couldn't be made today, is Archie would be considered a misogynist.
Oh, God, yeah.
He would be considered a wife abuser. He never physically hit Edith, but he was always yelling at her, telling her to stifle and calling her a dingbat. I mean, I just can't imagine. I consider myself somewhat of a feminist, but, there's feminists and then there's the crazy bitches.
Well, yeah.
And, the crazy bitches are the ones that would look at All in the Family and just, get their panties in an uproar over, what Archie said. And these are characters. These are caricatures. And people, and you're right, people don't understand satire. They don't understand the message and the humor. They just see the superficiality and go off half-cocked.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And again, nobody understands satire anymore. Nobody understands highbrow humor. And listen, yeah. I'm a big fan of lowbrow humor. I mean, I like a good fart joke as much as anyone, Yeah. But it seems like so much comedy today is really, let's see who can get to the bottom of the barrel quickest, as opposed to the comedy, the more subtle stuff like Good Times or All in the Family. So do you remember, to talk real quick about shitty shows from the 70s? I do not know why I thought of this show the other day, but I did. Do you remember a show called Super Train? It was on for 8 or 9 episodes, and it was supposed to be the Love Boat on a train. So it was this atomic powered super duper luxury train, and and you were going to have all these stories playing out on it, and it almost destroyed NBC back in the late 70s. But I have a fascination with that show. You can't get it, anywhere, and there's some shitty versions on YouTube and stuff. But if that came out on DVD, I would buy it tomorrow. I have a thing for crappy shows that lasted for a second.
Well, one of the shows that I would absolutely buy in a second would be When Things Were Rotten.
Yeah.
Dick Van Patten was in it. He played Friar Tuck. And Dick Gautier played Robin Hood. And it was a show made by Mel Brooks. And I thought it was, at the time, one of the funniest shows I'd ever seen. I loved that show, and of course it only lasted, I think, one season. And I've seen some clips here and there on YouTube. It doesn't quite hold up, but just that nostalgia for that show is really incredible. I absolutely loved it as a kid.
There is another show that I liked that was only on for one season for a few episodes. You probably will remember it. It was a sci-fi show called Quark with Richard Benjamin, right? And the two really hot twins. You know who created that show? Buck Henry. Buck Henry, who of course he made himself famous with Get Smart, a TV show about an interstellar garbage scow. But that's another one. Like, please, TV gods, let these shows come out on DVD, please.
Yes, I would love to see a lot of these old shows again.
Consolidate them somewhere, oh, please.
One of the great things that Antenna TV is doing is every night they're showing old Tonight shows.
Oh, nice.
It's the first time that Tonight Show has been, with Johnny Carson, has been broadcast since the original airings. And for legal reasons, they can't call it the Tonight Show. They just call it the Johnny Carson Show. But everything else is intact. And I've been watching it since it started. I think it was on January 1st, debuted. And holy shit, you talk about somebody who was really breaking some ground. And I knew that the Tonight Show had, with Jack Parr and Steve Allen and, Johnny Carson. But you can see so much of what's come after him in these shows. I can see Letterman in there. I can see, Leno, Conan O'Brien. It's amazing how much Johnny Carson was mimicked.
Yeah, I'm sure you can get it on DVD now, but I still have the final 2 episodes of The Tonight Show on VHS because it was such a big deal, when Johnny retired.
Oh, yeah, it was. And what I think is really great is because his monologues were very topical. I mean, just like every comedian who has a night show. But again, because it's from 30 and 40 years ago, you get a flavor of what was going on in the country at the time. And I just find it really interesting. And some of the guests that he has were really fascinating. I mean, he had Norman Mailer on one show, and he spent a half an hour talking to Norman Mailer.
Yep.
You couldn't get that today.
No, because people have the attention span of a hamster.
I like seeing some of the comedians who are like icons now, like George Carlin, just getting his start on the Tonight Show. Richard Pryor was on the Tonight Show, just getting his start. It's just really, I'm having a blast watching it. And is it always funny or always interesting? No, but when you're on nightly for 20 some odd years, not every show is going to be a gem.
Oh yeah.
I like seeing the old people. Not old people, but the old guests like Bob Hope.
Yep.
And people of that ilk on the show. It just really, it makes me wistful almost. And that's how I know I'm getting old.
Yeah, well, look, it was a different time, and that's very cliche to say that, because I think every generation says it. And again, I'm sure my daughter will be telling, her children, yeah, the 2000s, it was a different time. But I think it was much more family-oriented. Like, the Saturday night ritual in my house was we would watch The Love Boat and Fantasy Island. That was it. And we all did that, like the whole family. We sat and we watched those 2 shows. My grandmother loved them. And, and it was only one TV in the house back then, So whatever, my grandmother was the matriarch, so whatever she was watching right then, that's what we're watching. And that was that, Love Boat and Fantasy Island. And then, big rituals for us were the variety shows. You know, I know I'm getting old too because I heard that Tony Orlando is reuniting with Dawn to do some concert shows near me this year. So I am not embarrassed to say that I will be going to see that. But you know what? Like we said, we grew up with some cool shit. You know, it's fun to talk about it.
And this one was definitely planned. And as I'm speaking, Good Times is on, and there's a character who's a pimp on. And he's got on a green velvet hat, green velvet coat, the wide pink shirt lapels.
Nice.
Wide collar. There was no mischaracterization of black people then.
Oh, God.
And that was the other show that I loved, Beretta.
Beretta. We could go on and on. Starsky and Hutch, Sanford and Son. We could talk for hours.
Next time, Todd and I got to talk about the 1920s.
Listen, we could.
If we ever dip in the well too many times, that might be an option.
Maybe.
As always, this has been a lot of fun.
Yes, it was. Listen, how could they not? Let's face it.
Exactly. And for those who remember, in the comments section, why don't you tell us what some of your favorite shows were and what some of the memories that you had from the 70s, be it movies, music, or television, because we would like to hear about that and get some comments going.
Absolutely.
Yes. Put that discus to work. Get people to comment on it. And if you like the Imaginarium, please go ahead and check us out on iTunes and rate us and leave a review. And if you would like, listen to all the other podcasts that we have on the Supernauts Network at thesupernauts.com, as well as all the reviews and everything else that we've got up there. And until next time, may all your journeys be filled with pure imagination.